He would flog her to death with a rubber truncheon. He would tie her naked to a stake and shoot her full of arrows like Saint Sebastian. He would ravage her and cut her throat at the moment of climax. Better than before, moreover, he realized why it was her that he hated. He hated her because she was young and pretty and sexless, because he wanted to go to bed with her and would never do so, because of her round, sweet, supple waist which seemed to ask you to encircle it with your arm. There was only the audacious act, scarlet sash, aggressive symbol of chastity. The hate rose to its climax. The voice of Goldstein had become an actual sheep's bleat, and for an instant the face changed into that of a sheep. Then the sheep face melted into the figure of a Eurasian soldier who seemed to be advancing, huge and terrible, his submachine gun roaring and seeming to spring out of the surface of the screen, so that some of the people in the front row actually flinched backwards in their seats. But in that same moment, drawing a deep sigh of relief from everybody, the hostile figure melted into the face of Big Brother, black-haired, black-mustachioed, full of power and mysterious calm, and so vast that it almost filled up the screen. Nobody heard what Big Brother was saying. It was merely a few words of encouragement, the sort of words that are uttered in the din of a battle, not distinguishable individually, but restoring confidence by the fact of being spoken. Then the face of Big Brother faded away again, and instead the three slogans of the party stood out in bold capitals. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. But the face of Big Brother seemed to persist for several seconds on the screen, as though the impact that it had made on everyone's eyeballs were too vivid to wear off immediately. The little sandy-haired woman had flung herself forward over the back of her chair in front of her. With a tremulous murmur that sounded like "My Savior," she extended her arms toward the screen, and she buried her face in her hands. It was apparent that she was uttering a prayer. At this moment the entire group of people broke into a deep, slow, rhythmical chant of "Bibi, Bibi, Bibi," over again, very slowly, with a long pause between the first B and the second, a heavy, murmurous sound, somehow curiously savage, in the background of which one seemed to clear the stamp of naked feet and the throbbing of tom-toms. For perhaps as much as 30 seconds they kept it up. It was a refrain that was often heard in moments of overwhelming emotion. Partly, it was a sort of hymn to the wisdom and majesty of Big Brother, but still more, it was an act of self-hypnosis, a deliberate drowning of consciousness by means of rhythmic noise. Winston's entrails seemed to grow cold. In the 2 minutes' hate, he could not help sharing in the general delirium. But this subhuman chanting of "Beep, beep," always filled him with horror. Of course he chanted with the rest. It was impossible to do otherwise. To dissemble your feelings, to control your face, to do what everyone else was doing was an instinctive reaction. But there was a space of couple of seconds during which the expression in his eyes might conceivably have betrayed him. And it was exactly at this moment that the significant thing happened, if, indeed, it did happen. Momentarily he caught O'Brien's eye. O'Brien had stood up. He had taken off his spectacles and was at the act of resettling them on his nose with his characteristic gesture. But there was a fraction of a second when their eyes met, and for as long as it took to happen, Winston knew, yes, he knew, that O'Brien was thinking the same thing as himself. An unmistakable message had been passed. It was as though their two minds had opened, and the thoughts were flowing from one into the other through their eyes. "I am with you," O'Brien seemed to be saying. "I know precisely what you are feeling. I know about all of your contempt, your hatred, your disgust. But don't worry, I'm on your side." And then the flash of intelligence was gone, and O'Brien's face was inscrutable as everyone else's. That was all. And he was already uncertain whether it had happened. Such incidences never had any sequel. All that they did was to keep alive in him the belief, or hope, that others besides himself were the enemies of the party. Perhaps the rumors of vast underground conspiracies were true after all. Perhaps the Brotherhood really existed. It was impossible, in spite of the endless arrests and confessions and executions, to be sure that the Brotherhood was not simply a myth. Some days he believed in it, some days not. There was no evidence, only fleeting glimpses that might mean anything or nothing. Snatches of overheard conversation, faint scribbled on laboratory walls once, even when two strangers met, a small movement of the hands which had looked as though it might be a signal of recognition. It was all guesswork. Very likely he had imagined everything. He had gone all the way back to his cubicle without looking at O'Brien again. The idea of following up their momentary contact hardly crossed his mind. It would have been inconceivably dangerous, even if he had known exactly how to go about doing it. For a second, 2 seconds, they had exchanged an unequivocal glance, and that was the end of the story. But even that was a memorable event, and in the locked loneliness in which one had to live. Winston roused himself up and sat up straighter. He let out a belch. The gin was rising from his stomach. His eyes refocused on the page. He discovered that while he sat helplessly musing, he had also been writing, as though in automatic action. And it was no longer the same cramped, awkward handwriting as before. His pen had slid voluptuously over the smooth paper, printing out in large, neat capitals, "Down with Big Brother, down with Big Brother, down with Big Brother," over and over again, filling up half a page. He could not help but feel a twinge of panic. It was absurd, since the writing of those particular words were not more dangerous than the initial act of opening the diary. But for a moment he was tempted to tear out the spoiled pages and abandon the enterprise altogether. But he did not do so, however, because he knew it was useless. Whether he wrote down with Big Brother, or whether he refrained from writing it, made no difference. Whether he went on with the diary, or whether he did not go on with it, made no difference. The thought police would get him just the same. He had committed, would still have committed, even if he had never set pen to paper, the essential crime that contained all others in itself. Thought crime, they called it. Thought crime was not a thing that could be concealed forever. You might dodge successfully for a while, even for years, but sooner or later they were bound to get you. It was always at night. The arrests invariably happened at night. The sudden jerk out of sleep, the rough hand shaking your shoulder, the lights glaring in your eyes, the ring of hard faces around the bed. The vast majority of cases there were no trial, no report of the arrest. People simply disappeared, always during the night. Your name was removed from the registers, and every record of everything you'd ever done was wiped out. Your one-time existence was denied and then forgotten. You were abolished, annihilated, vaporized was the usual word. For a moment, he was seized by a kind of hysteria. He began writing in a hurriedly untidy scrawl. "They'll shoot me, I don't care. They'll shoot me in the back of the neck, I don't care. Down with Big Brother, they always shoot you in the back of the neck, I don't care. Down with Big Brother." He began to sit back in the chair, silently ashamed of himself, and laid down the pen. The next moment he started violently. There was a knock at the door. Already? He sat as still as a mouse, in the futile hope that whoever it was might go away after a single attempt. But no, the knocking was repeated. The worst thing of all was that it had to be the delay. His heart was thumping like a drum, but his face, from long habit, was probably expressionless. He got up and moved heavily towards the door.